That thing was too big to be called a gun. Too big of a caliber. It was more like a man-portable cannon. The Barrett M82 is a genre-defining rifle, being the brainchild of a photographer with zero engineering experience. He reinvented the anti-material rifle, all because said photographer saw an M2 Browning machine gun and its 50 cal cartridge and was curious about its potential commercial value. The origins of the Barrett and the anti-material rifle date back further than you think. The idea to make a rifle with the purpose of causing severe damage and destruction to equipment started all the way back in World War I as the anti-tank rifle. Back then, tanks had what we would consider very little armor by modern standards. Troops in the trenches needed a way to deal with these steel behemoths marching across no man's land that were impervious to conventional small arms fire and hoped that Allied artillery could somehow hit a moving target. The Germans were the first to be on this receiving end of the new content update when the British rolled up with the Mark I heavy tank, and at first the Mark I seemed terrifying as this metal monster that could walk through both man-made hell of no man's land and the conventional forms of gunfire, with a direct fire mortar being the easiest way to deal with them. But war breeds necessity and innovation, so the Germans countered with armor-piercing bullets, creating the reversed bullet. The reversed bullet was exactly what you think it was. It was the standard 7.92 Mauser. They put some extra powder in it and flipped the bullet around so that the flat end would hit the tank first, as it wasn't as likely to deflect or break apart, so all the kinetic energy would go into the Mark I's armor, causing spalling. Spalling, for those who don't know, is when something, metal in this case, fragments, causing smaller pieces to break off, of creating an impromptu frag grenade on the opposite side of the material that was struck, and in our case, the opposite side of the metal are British tanker crews. One small problem: these reverse bullets were unsafe to use in the standard rifle because of the extra powder, so they weren't that popular with the troops. So they made the K bullet, the K being German for Kern, meaning core. This one was a lot safer, with it having a steel core giving it more weight and considerably more penetration power, and also not feeling like it was made by your friend's shitty hand loads. Unfortunately for the Germans, the British would figure this out and make the Mark IV tank, with improved armor making the K bullet ineffective against tanks. So now the Germans need a new solution. You might be thinking, why not use those direct fire mortars you mentioned earlier? This is because this was when even the smallest mortars were still large pieces of equipment that needed to be on wheels to even move, so trying to move a mortar to get an angle on a tank in the mud and confined space of a trench, then trying to hit the tank was already hard enough. Now try doing that in a war. So knowing that an artillery piece is out of the question, they backtracked a little bit and looked at elephant rifles. These are guns designed to hunt big game like elephants, obviously, and they probably thought elephants are giant fleshy behemoths and tanks are giant steel behemoths, so they're kind of similar. With this advanced line of thought, they would design a rifle with the sole purpose of destroying armored targets, giving us the Mauser Tankgewehr M1918, also known as the Mauser 13mm anti-tank rifle, or the T-Gewehr, giving us the first anti-material rifle. And before some of you go, it's an anti-tank rifle, why are you calling it an anti-material rifle? Take a wild guess what tanks are made out of. Some of these rifles would be captured, giving other nations the same bright idea during the interwar period would create their own anti-tank rifles just in time for World War II. We would get things like the British Boys anti-tank rifle, the Soviet PTR-D41 and PTR-S41, the Japanese Type 97 automatic cannon, and the Finnish Leahy L39. In the early years of the war, anti-tank rifles were essential for dealing with tanks, but once again, war breeds necessity and innovation, but this time the tanks got too much armor, to the point that anti-tank rifles became obsolete and were being phased out in favor of anti-tank launchers like the British Piat, the German Panzerfaust, and the American Bazooka, though some units would still use anti-tank rifles through the Korean War. But as the Cold War started, the threat of Soviet armor marching across Europe made anti-tank rifles fully phased out in favor of rocket launchers, recoilless rifles, and guided missiles. But the concept wasn't completely dead. In steps our hero, Ronnie Barrett. Ronnie was a professional photographer in Murfreesboro, Tennessee since 1972. Ronnie would be a professional photographer for 10 years, getting his own photography business, giving him the opportunity of a lifetime in January of 1982, where he would be taking photos of a river gun boat on the Stones River near Nashville. He would take a particular interest in the twin-mounted M2 Browning machine guns on the boat, but more specifically, the 50 BMG rounds that they fire and its potential for commercial users. Ronnie would then take this interest and, with no engineering experience, would hand sketch out plans for a semi-auto rifle chambered in 50 BMG, then contacting tool and die maker Bob Mitchell and making the first functional prototype 4 months later, creating the first shoulder-fired 50 cal rifle known as the Barrett M82 in 1982. Immediately, Barrett would start looking for investors in his company by showing off the prototype at a gun show in Houston, and investors he found giving him enough funds to make the first 30 M82 rifles. He would follow this up with the improved M82A1 with an improved muzzle brake, the M82A1A designed for the Mark II 11 Ralphus round, and the M82A1M with a rear grip and monopod socket built into the stock in 1986. Skipping over how the IRA and the Mujahideen got their hands on some M82s, Barrett would get their first military contract for the Swedish Army in 1989, employing the M82A1 as a sniper rifle. The United States would follow suit in 1990 as the Special Applications Scoped Rifle, employing it as an anti-material rifle and an EOD tool just in time for the Gulf War. But Barrett wasn't done tinkering with his rifle, making the strangest and rarest variant the M82A2, a bullpup variant of the rifle. That became strangely popular after Brandon Herrera made a video about his A2 with every Twitter artist that can draw a gun latching onto it afterwards. But this was the 90s, so the A2 didn't sell so well, so Barrett went back to the drawing board, probably by hand again, and made the M82A3, which removed the rear grip and monopod socket on the stock. But Mr. Barrett wasn't done. He would still have one more design for the M82 when the Army adopted an improved variant of the M82A1M as the M107 in 2002. Being fielded alongside the A3 as a sniper rifle, anti-material rifle, and an EOD tool again. With the M82 as a whole being in service for over 30 years, but the Army and Marines would start to replace the M82 with the Mark 22 MRAD, a modular bolt-action rifle also made by Barrett. Outside of the military, the M82 is seen as the gold standard for semi-auto anti-material rifles, with most semi-auto rifles taking inspiration from the M82, as it is surprisingly hard to make a reliable and safe semi-auto 50 cal. A reminder, this was hand-sketched by a photographer with no engineering experience. With Barrett's line of rifles becoming a popular choice for long-range competition shooting to the point that both civilian and military snipers needed to frequently account for the rotation of the planet thanks to the power behind the 50 BMG, blurring the lines between ballistics and astrophysics. With it being the gold standard and first shoulder-fired 50 cal, it can almost always be seen as the only semi-auto 50 cal in games, rarely being replaced by other rifles like the GMX-6 Lynx or the even rarer cameo from the AK-50. With the M82 being recognized as the official state rifle of Tennessee on February 26th, 2016, the same state it was born in. And that is the Barrett 50 cal, a rifle that reinvented a dead weapons platform and pushed the boundaries and standards of what long-range sniping could be, becoming a synopsis with long-range shooting and high-caliber rifles. But hey, I'm H. Consider subscribing.